cool.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're a minute late to the live stream. We are live and direct from Cookeville, Tennessee with Gus Creeder and Teacher on the Radio, from Charlotte, North Carolina with Scott Greenberg of the Debts No Honest Man Can Pay podcast, and Gus Creeder, of course, an assistant editor at the Tennessee Tech Oracle and their music critic, resident music critic, and Rick Quinn of popmatters.com. And I'm Andrew Smith, the curator of this crazy nerd club and a DJ and blogger at teacherontheradio.com. Tonight, we have the honor of discussing Tracy Chapman's self-titled debut from 1988. And we're going out on YouTube Live and Facebook Live. And I need to ask somebody for faster internet because I'm worried that my video and audio are not as pristinely 5K as they need to be. I'm going to lead us off this week as I chose this month's album, but having talked to my peers in the green room before going online, it's pretty clear to me that everybody has a ton to say about this record and what it signifies, not just to the pop music canon, but to really everything that this whole gathering is about us nerding out about the things that we love. And for some reason, I'm just going to say this right now because it's distracting me. It's been setting my stream to private. Okay, now it is public on my homepage. So I was live streaming literally to me, myself, and I. I'm going to put my colleagues back in the green room. I'm going to lead us off, and you'll be hearing from them in just a moment. This is the Music Nerds Record Club number 9. Somehow we've made it this far to number 9. So go with me on a journey to my past, to the summer of 1988, when this was the album of the summer. And as I was preparing for our time together this evening, I did what I think many of us do. I started reading reviews, listening to podcasts. When you're dealing with something like Tracy Chapman's self-titled album, we know that it is already in the American music canon. It's in the pop culture canon. This is a known entity. And with Fast Car resurfacing as a hit more than 30 years after its release, about 35 years after its release, we know the longevity and endurance of this record. So I thought to myself, go listen to a good podcast. And I looked it up on my podcast browser of choice. I found several streams dealing with Tracy Chapman's self-titled debut from 1988. And so I started to listen, and immediately the erudite experts promoted a fallacy that the 1980s were simply a moral void for hair bands and superficial Reaganite capitalists. They were feeding this stereotype of the 80s and the big hair and the plasticity of the 80s. And so they, in a way, were making a mockery, in my opinion, of Tracy Chapman's radical folk sensibilities, acting as though it was some strange anomaly and mystery of where this album could have ever come from with all of this topical songwriting in the hair band 80s. But in my experience in 1987 and 1988, I had seen firsthand extreme poverty and drug addiction on the streets of Detroit, Michigan, and Atlanta, Georgia. I knew that the songs Across the Lines and Talking About a Revolution spoke to the American underclass that I had seen with their cups out, begging for spare change, hustling for a 40 ounce of malt liquor or a bottle of wild Irish rose. I did not see this topical folk music as some kind of a utopian or dystopian throwback to the ideology of abstraction and the stereotype that we had of the 1960s. Long before Eminem mythologized this, Greenberg and I and Joe, if he had been here, knew that we had 8 Mile Road as an actual place. We had 8 Mile Road as an actual place. And who would dare to go, as Tracy Chapman sings in Across the Line, across that line that separates the white community from the black community. We had that in Metro Detroit. I then was coming into my young adulthood, 20, now almost 21 years old, in the Corridor neighborhood, and living in the shadow in 1988 of July 1967, when a Vietnam veterans coming home party at a Blind Pig resulted in the Detroit Rebellion, when the police tried to shut down just a bunch of good friends having a late night party, and burned my hometown, many of the buildings, to the ground. So it is the summer of 1988, and I'm working as a college dropout at a health food store called the Cass Corridor Food Co-op. Now, the food co-op is a very eclectic bunch of people. We were all ages and all races. We were punk and hippie, Rastafarian and folky. And somehow among the staff at that time, Tracy Chapman's album was an easy consensus amongst us all for workplace jams. So every day we would go to work and we'd listen to this album while stocking the shelves and ringing up the cash register. It was the soundtrack to my summer of 1988. And we also learned of other radical folkies of the late 80s. I learned about Michelle Shocked and her album Short, Sharp, Shocked. I learned of a lesser known artist on SST Records called Roger Manning and what they called the anti-folk movement. I didn't realize how fortunate I was to live in a bohemian and racially integrated community where my downward mobility and a little bit of my skin color privilege allowed me to cross between many different communities seamlessly, many different realities. And my codes were getting switched and my assumptions were getting ditched. Our community had, in the Corridor neighborhood, multiple of communes and party pads, and we even had our own neighborhood jug band. So the direct lyrics of this album spoke to my direct experience at that time, and her soulful contralto voice, that deep, robust voice that is throughout this album, was timeless and timely. The song's arrangements were both spare and simultaneously sophisticated. It's wild to me that it's a musical bridge building kind of record to what now we would call NPR music or adult alternative or easy listening, because it had such fierce lyrics. And it's strange to me that these underlying themes have not gone away. They remain timeless and accessible to all. And it reminds me that all good American folk, rock, and blues has always come from the working class, the underclass, and the people on the margins of society. Sure, it has entered mainstream, but it's always coming from the outside to the inside and not the other way around. And the issues that she addresses in this record, such as institutional racism, war, domestic violence, the class war against the rich against the poor, all of these things are still issues in the United States. But long before the surprise movie sensation, it was probably a underground movie sensation of The Shack, made a black woman god. Rick at least knows what I'm talking about. I believe that Tracy Chapman was a goddess and a prophet for Generation X. And she was a feminist prophet among many feminist prophets of that period. And then I started to think how many great underground women artists and women in rock and folk and we had in that period, and they were everywhere. She was not an outlier. She was part of a movement. And we just recently were remembering Sinead O'Connor, who came a little bit after her. But then I was thinking of course, of Michelle Shocked. But then I started to think, and I could just go on and on. I could think of Suzanne Vega and Frank and Edie Brickell, Natalie Merchant, Maria McKee, even Exene Cervanka, Elizabeth Fraser, and Alison Moyet. And I could go on all night, but I even messaged my friends that just because we have 4 instead of 6 tonight, we shouldn't talk all night. And so I've gone over my time. And so I'm going to look at my notes here, and I'm going to turn the baton and the microphone over to Scott, who's joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina, to share some of his bits about Tracy Chapman's self-titled debut.
Thanks, Andy. I didn't realize I was going to be sharing my bits, but I will share my words. I kept putting off revisiting Tracy Chapman's 1988 self-titled debut until I was reminded yesterday that Record Club is tonight. So I sat down with it this morning, and it was like catching up with an old friend on the kind of overcast autumn day I'd been pining for since May. I didn't expect to have so much to say about it, but I'm thrilled to be wrong. The songs on Tracy Chapman's 1988 self-titled debut are as relevant today, if not more, than they were 36 years ago. I remember spinning this record on the radio at Michigan State and thought it was cool, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment when Fast Car broke through several months later. It was one of those rare moments when someone from the outside breaks through to the mainstream to elevate the radio, or to elevate the state of radio, if only for a few minutes at a time. That the most unlikely of artists, Luke Combs, would make the song relevant again 35 years later was another one of those moments no one saw coming. Bonus points to Mr. Combs for not judging the gender perspective of Tracy's original. However, I'd argue the song never lost its relevance. Its relevance is evergreen. It's the somber version of Born to Run, not unlike how the Replacement's Here Comes the Regular is the bleak version of Cheers. When Bruce sings, "Someday Girl, I don't know when we're going to get to that place where we really want to go and walk in the sun," it's pure, unadulterated, bold, technicolor cinematic triumph. But when Tracy sings, "You got a fast car, is it fast enough so we can fly away? We've got to make a decision. Leave tonight or live and die this way." It's gritty indie cinema with stakes. There's no triumph. There's only escape or damnation by stagnation. The clock is ticking and the engine's running. But Fast Car is just the tip of the iceberg. Tracy heralded in a whole new generation of American singer-songwriters, predating Lilith Fair by a good 7 years. Talking About a Revolution is a protest song for the ages and could easily sit betwixt Beyonce's Freedom and T Swift's We're Not Ever Getting Back Together on your favorite Kamala Walls mixtape. Across the Lines is still eerily accurate and could have been written yesterday. Behind the Walls' a cappella arrangement underscores its depiction of domestic violence in a way you simply can't ignore. Baby Can I Hold You Tonight is subversive in lulling the casual listener into thinking they're hearing a love song, but dig beneath the surface and it reveals a dig at a significant other's inability to express their emotions. Equally subversive with its catchy marimba synths is Mountains of Things, a modern spin on If I Were a Rich Man with a be careful what you wish for twist. She's Got Her Ticket shines a rare glimmer of hope and empowerment. Why is a deceptively simple protest song in which Tracy makes her songcraft look so damn easy. Sometimes asking direct questions in the most direct way is the most powerful way to get one's point across. Why are the missiles called peacekeepers when they're aimed to kill? Why is a woman still not safe in her home? Is a couplet for the ages that still, sadly, rings too true to be good. For My Lover shows off Tracy's skills as a storyteller in the classic storytelling tradition of the folk music that inspires her. Finally, how could I forget how much I love For You, the album's closer? This is how you close an album. It's the purest love song on the record and a rare moment of hope wrapped up in a gorgeous hug of a solo acoustic arrangement. Back to you.
Well, Scott, that was beautiful. It was beautiful. Well, good evening, everybody. During my time of being an avid music lover, the name Tracy Chapman has always been a name that I recognized, but like many, and especially many my age, her performance of her song, her classic song, Fast Car, at the Grammys earlier this year, alongside Nashville's favorite big boy, Luke Combs, left me eternally curious and appreciative that I'm alive in the same timeline as Tracy Chapman. Going back and listening to Chapman's self-titled debut, the debut album from 1988, it was an eye-opener, to say the least. Songs like Talking About a Revolution, Baby Can I Hold You, and Why, made it very easy to acknowledge and understand that this album is not only a classic, but a masterpiece of storytelling. And for the most part, it's due to Chapman's unbelievable voice, her incredible voice. It's Chapman's ability to tell compelling stories that makes the album such a landmark as well. With her raw, honest quality in her voice that can easily connect with the listener and make you feel basically every emotion that she is conveying. Whether she's singing about social issues or personal struggles or hope, Chapman draws you into her world in a way that very few artists can. What makes this album particularly captivating is how the instrumentation throughout it, a lot of it takes a back seat. It's subtle and often understated, allowing Chapman's voice and lyrics to remain the front and center of the whole project. And the minimalist approach gives the songs throughout this album an intimate and almost personal feeling, kind of like she is speaking directly to you, making it very easy to listen. Chapman's journey to stardom was very interesting to me. I did a marginal amount of research, and it seemed from her humble beginnings as a broke university student, just busking on the street in order to make ends meet, she rose to global fame following this album, and subsequently within the same year, I saw performed at the Nelson Mandela 70th tribute concert in June of 1988, and this album released in April. And her quick rise truly does speak volumes about the power of her artistry and the impact that her music has had. And as we can see from Luke Combs' massive, I think it peaked at number 2 on the Hot 100 cover of Fast Car, it continues to have that same sort of impact. And Scott had said that the music seems to be more relevant than ever, and I couldn't agree more. For me, one of the most moving tracks, because I had been familiar with some of the bigger songs on this album for a while now, but one of the most moving tracks to me was the a cappella piece, Behind the Wall. It's a heart-wrenching in its storytelling, and the repetition at the end of the chorus of "the police always come late if they come at all," in reference to Chapman hearing the screams and subsequent silence of the domestic violence next door. The fact that it is an a cappella piece and the absence of instrumentation accentuates her words and has kept me and left me speechless after every listen. Of course, no discussion of this record would be complete without mentioning, of course I have, but her original Fast Car. This track is a hit for a reason. The instrumental arrangement is a little more lush than some of the deeper cuts on the album, and would fit into a playlist, fit onto the radio. It never, because of the lack of too much going on within the instrumentation that you find throughout the whole album, it very much so never overshadows her storytelling. And the narrative of escape and hope combined with Chapman's unparalleled voice makes it one of the most iconic songs of the era, and a track that definitely still resonates now, and I can imagine will continue to. But yeah, wrapping up, Tracy Chapman's self-titled is one of the most stellar albums I have ever listened to. I was so grateful that it was that it was Mr. Andrews' choice for this month. And it's timeless, based even just solely on Chapman's incredible, unique voice, her storytelling ability, and the subtle yet effective instrumentation that allows these elements to shine. It's an album that you can return to time and time again and always discover something new within its depth and deep sincerity. But that I had such a great time going into this album and listening through it as many times as I have in the past week or so. And yeah, I'm really grateful, as I usually am by the end of each month or by the time that we do our call each month. But yeah, I'm going to pass it on.
Thanks, Gus. And I think you're going to find me echoing the themes of my colleagues who have covered this so well. And I'll just follow up with what Gus closed with. Andrew picked an absolute classic in American popular music. And as I was preparing for this, I was finding it really difficult to describe the sensations that accompanied hearing Tracy Chapman for the first time. American popular music in 1988 would see some prophetic voices of steely rage emerge in the summer, with Public Enemy's "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" resonating with the kinetic energy of New York City. And then NWA's "Straight Outta Compton" in August took on the brutality of the police state in Daryl Gates' Los Angeles. But in the spring of 1988, the sound of revolution was a whisper. Tracy Chapman was an unknown who took the music world by storm on the absolute strength of this debut album, combined, as Gus pointed out, with a mesmerizing performance of Fast Car at the concert for Nelson Mandela at Wembley Stadium. The 80s were ending, and the mirage of trickle-down economics had been exposed as the wealth gap in America began to grow ever more chasmic, a trend that has scarcely slowed down in the 36 years since this album dropped. Tracy Chapman gave voice to the moment in an amazing way, bringing the margins to bear on the center. Don't you know we're talking about a revolution? Listening to the album now, I'm struck by its enduring relevance. Like Scott mentioned, many of these songs are so fresh still. Despite not being the primarily acoustic album I remembered, as Gus pointed out, the subtle studio production never overshadows the song's bare simplicity and power. Chapman's lyricism, her guitar, her gorgeously understated vocal delivery drive the album. Its impact is immeasurable, as it not only captured the spirit of the time, but also continues to shape it. Fast Car, as my colleagues have pointed out, is a masterclass of songwriting art. It speaks of the intertangling of hope and desperation, and how an image of inevitable escape keeps you going until it doesn't. It's panoramic and poignant. It's an absolute classic. I'm going to be bold and say that this may be the album that many Gen Xers, like myself, turn to be reminded of the passion for justice that once fueled them before it slowly got beat out of them by late-stage capitalism. Tracy Chapman produced a classic record in the folk roots tradition of American music that deftly and pointedly dealt with poverty, the racial divide, domestic violence, and war, while always attending to the profound power of love and human connection. Wrapping up, I'm going to highlight one song in particular that really struck me in my re-listen for this time. It's Mountains of Things. Here, Tracy captures the grinding spiritual and physical poverty of late-stage capitalism and how it propels itself through the opiate of elusive riches and the need to consume. The song careens back and forth between backbreaking work and struggling to make a living wage, with the pressure to consume as a form of identity. This is the era of Robin Leach's Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous, which would eventually highlight the capitalist chimera that is Donald Trump. What strikes me now as the song's genius is the Afro-Caribbean beat propelling it, a rhythmic reminder that America's grotesque prosperity for the few has been built from the very beginning on stolen wages and broken bodies. This album will always hold a special place in my heart because of the time in my life, my early 20s, just barely adult on my own. I had spent the summer of '88 in San Francisco, working with the homeless in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood when I encountered this. It's part of my ongoing awakening to injustice and to hope, and one that I need to return to again and again. And I'm so grateful for Andrew for picking it. Thanks.
Does anybody want to comment on anything anybody else said on this record before we switch to part 2? Did you forget to say anything, anyone? I forgot to mention that we had previously looked at 1988 when Rick picked Public Enemy, and in responding to the people who were naive enough to think that hair bands were the big thing in the 80s and didn't mention hip hop at all. Thank you, Rick, for reminding us that all this radical hip hop, political hip hop, also KRS-One's first album, Stop the Violence, came out right around this time as well. So good call.
Andy,
Very, very progressive year.
You have to keep in mind that most people were not as cool as us. So for them, they were awash in a sea of hair farmers.
All right. So I had suggested to my colleagues that maybe we would somehow manage to get through this, since there was fewer of us in less than half an hour for part 1. But we're coming right up on the hump, and we've got the second half of Music Nerds Record Club. This is a monthly live stream. We could call it a podcast, I guess. That we do together. Usually we're 6. Tonight we're only 4. The second part of the program is we go to our recent listens and things that we're excited about. And as I was making my notes for today, I realized I had a lot to talk about, so I'm going to take my colleagues off screen. And next up after me is going to be Gus. You're on deck for round 2. So one of the things I've talked about during my allotted times for recent listens is I've talked about books that I'm reading that relate to our topics. I think I've hyped up Joni Mitchell book by Ann Powers, the NPR writer that has recently been on my radar. I've been reading this book by Jack Carneal, Carneal, on and off for years since I bought it at a small independent bookstore in St. Louis. The opening preface is written by Will Oldham, also known as Bonnie Prince Billy, pictured on the left. So not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I was up in Illinois, and I got to see Bonnie Prince Billy for the first time. That was a huge bucket list show for me. Bonnie Prince Billy mostly played music off of his 2023 album. But back in the 90s, Jack Carneal played drums in a band with Bonnie Prince Billy called Palace. And then they changed its name to like Palace Music. And then in the early zeros, Jack Carneal was in a band, late 90s and early zeros, Jack Carneal was in a band with Will Oldham's brother called the Anomanon. And apparently only Amanda Petrusic really knew who they were. She wrote several glowing reviews of the Anomanon in Pitchfork and gave them like 8 stars. And he thought for sure he was on the verge of breaking out. Well, they never broke out. And no one has really revived their reputation other than Carneal in his memoir, because if you go on Spotify, all the Anomanon albums are there, but nobody's listening to them. They have very few stream numbers on our favorite streaming services. And Carneal found his way as an author and as an English professor. And even him telling the stories of like figuring out how to be an English professor and still go on tour with his band while keeping his job at the university just made me happy. I go on tour with bands all the time, not as the performer, obviously, but also try to hold down a real university gig. I really related to this book. I can't recommend it enough. It was a very gritty 90s and zeros memoir. And I love Bonnie Prince Billy. I had such a good time seeing him at Illinois. I also got to sit in on a talk by Jeff Tweedy at the Evanston Folk Festival. No songs were played, and it was just an interview, and it was amazing. And he brought me to tears, and he talked about his Jewish faith and his belief in God in the absence of God. Those of you who have ever emailed one of our colleagues, he knows he has the word apophatic. I'm talking about Rick. He has the word apophatic in his email. That is the spirituality of absence or negative theology. And Jeff Tweedy gave us a 2-minute class on that and brought everybody's chins to the floor just with how erudite of a theologian he was, even though he has a song with Wilco bashing theologians. Scott and I got to go see Sierra Farrell together in Charlotte in May, and I was just jumping on the Sierra train back then. I've since had a lot of time to listen to her brand new album, Trail of Flowers. I'm still madly in love with it. It's going to be probably in my top 10 for 2024, which we'll do in December on this live stream. Yes, Greenberg, Tweety's wife was raised Jewish, and they wanted to raise their children Jewish, and he converted to Judaism, and they're active in their synagogue and all of it. Yeah. So this is where I was new to the Sierra Farrell thing when we saw her in the spring. I am now a super devoted Sierra Farrell fan and a fan of her outfits and everything else about her. And it was an absolutely incredible set on the bank of Lake Michigan at the Evanston Folk Fest. I could give all my time to the Evanston Folk Fest. So I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more things. My friends in the collection out of North Carolina have a new album out that deals primarily with mental health issues and surviving suicidal ideation and choosing to go on mental health medication and other things like that. And the collection have been active for a decade, and they've had much of the same lineup for the last several years, though there's been several lineup changes. But here's a band with a pop sound, more almost pop folk than folk, with not thousands of streams, but millions and millions of streams. They got signed by Network Records. They got a major label deal, and they simply, in my opinion, I don't think they can make ends meet as a band. And so his touring band is chosen to pursue other adult paths. They're breaking up as a band. I don't know all the details, but when they played in Nashville, where the picture on the left is taken from, they were just playing in this tiny little club, The End, where I saw them years ago. They had graduated up to the Basement East, but apparently on this tour, that wasn't even big enough. That was too big for them. They had to switch back to The End. I mean, it's just a tiny little really just a tiny dive on Elliston Place. But they're going to be touring all over the U.S. They got a full tour. They're going out west. They're playing more cities in the Midwest and the South. And their new album is absolutely incredible. And their live show exceeds that. Finally, I'm just completely obsessed with Father John Misty. I realize I'm going to have the same problem with this that I did with the Decemberists earlier. I'm going to overconsume the singles. And then when the album comes out, I'm going to be disappointed. But Father John Misty has been releasing singles to his new album via text message to his fans and then releasing them later. The first single, Time Will Make Fools of All of Us, came out several weeks ago, and he's just dropped 2 new singles via text message that aren't out on the streamers yet. But I've become more and more obsessed with Father John Misty over the years. I could go on, but I've gone way over my time, and I want to give my colleagues time to talk and not hog the mic. And if I think of something I forgot, I'll bring it up at the end. And Gus Creeder's going to go next.
Well, I'm going to start by just saying I'm right with you with the Father John Misty. I guess Time Just Makes Fools of Us All is one of the best songs of the year so far. It's amazing. So it's starting to enter the fall, and I have a few albums that are like go-to fall albums, and they're very different, but I'm going to shout them all out. First off, Microphones, The Glow Part 2, Phil Elverum, one of the best albums ever. If you know, you know. He's one of the best songwriters of his era, and has influenced so many indie songwriters today. Been going back to that one a lot. Always gets me in the feelings. Another fall album that is one that my roommate has had on a lot, so it's been all in my head, and is very different from Glow Part 2, is 21 Savage and Metro Boomin's Savage Mode 2. It's like a Halloween album. It feels like a Halloween album, so it'll probably, I may even mention it again next month. It's so good. It's solid, pretty much solid front to back. Only a couple of songs I don't love, but it's great rapping performances, excellent production all the way through. Morgan Freeman commentating throughout it. It is very much so worth your time. I'm kind of dividing this up into reasons why I've been listening to these projects. One that I've been listening to a lot because it celebrated its 15-year anniversary yesterday is one of my favorite debut albums ever. One that very much so has affected my way of consuming hip hop and my understanding of what hip hop can be, as I think it also did with the general listening public when it released. It's Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon, The End of Day. Got it right here. One of the best, just one of my favorite albums ever. Cudi's control of melody, especially in that era, and vibe curation is really in its own lane. It's excellent. There are a couple of incredible concerts that I went to in the past month that have filled a lot of my listening. The first one was on a whim. I decided to buy a ticket to go see Childish Gambino at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. It was seemingly perfect timing since he has postponed the rest of his U.S. tour following a couple shows after that. But Awaken My Love, probably his best album front to back, if I had to, in my personal opinion. It's an excellent soul funk revival type of album. His vocals on it are excellent. The production is it feels so real. It's one that I remember the first time I listened to it, and I'll probably never forget that. And the record itself is one that made me want to start collecting records many years ago at this point. Another amazing show that I went to was JPEG Mafia in Atlanta. It was at the Eastern is the venue. I'd never been there before. It was amazing. Really, really cool space. And he performed with the openers RXK Nephew, who I mentioned last time, and it was a crazy, crazy pit. And Jane Remover, who's a super, super talented musician, signed to Dead Air Records, released an album last year, Census Designated, which got a lot of love. And I've been a big fan since her album Frailty, which came out a few years ago at this point. But for JPEG Mafia, I've been going back to his, I believe, technically third studio album, All My Heroes Are Cornballs, an album where the title gets more and more real every year, and the music just keeps getting better and better to me. It's one I've been listening to since freshman year of high school when it came out, and I still go back to it all the time. It's fantastic. And then just a couple more little recommendations from one of my favorite artists who I've just been getting back into recently, along with the lowering temperature, the artist Breakins. I had his album Hypochondriac in my top 10 of last year, I believe. And it's still an excellent abstract art pop album with some. He came from that internet hyperpop scene in the very late 2010s, going into the 2020s, and has just really evolved his sound. But that first album that really hit it off for him, Punk 2, is very much so one of my favorites to go back into. Very easy to spin front to back. It's short, sweet. He has great vocals, great production, and it's definitely one that has been in my rotation a lot recently. It's a friend group favorite for sure. But yeah, that's been most of my listening alongside the debut Tracy Chapman self-titled record. That has been most of my listening the past few weeks, and I ready to pass it off.
All right, thanks, Gus. I'm so glad you mentioned Phil Elverum because Mount Erie's Crow Looked at Me is one of the most impactful records I've ever come across. Just absolutely love it. I'm going to be brief with my recommendations. I've gotten back into writing reviews, which means that I'm listening to new music, but I'm listening to some albums over and over and over and over and over again, and not being as expansive as I'm drilling down on some albums. But one of the ones that it came out in early August, but I'm not sure that I've mentioned it yet. It is, and I'm gonna butcher the name, but I'm gonna give it a shot. Michelle here's where I get caught up. Indigello. Anyway, that was the hard part. Her recent album is called No More Water, and it is no more. The subtitle is The Gospel of James Baldwin. It is a concept album, and it is a powerful tribute rereading of James Baldwin's work. The title comes from the Fire Next Time, as does a lot of the content. It's a powerful experience to take a look at. Gus was talking about albums that you go to in the fall or go to for our special thing. And Andrew had mentioned Jeff Tweedy earlier. I picked up Sky Blue Sky, which is it's my favorite Wilco album. It's probably not their best, but it hit me at a point in my life when I needed to hear it. And every now and then, it just feels right. It is a classic of what I call middle-age rock and reflection. I missed last time's our last gathering, but I know that Andrew faithfully was able to pass along some of my recommendations. I've become an evangelist for this album. This is Nick Cave's latest album, Wild God, and I can't say enough about it. So I'm not going to say a lot other than it's just a powerful spiritual experience. It's immersive. It's great songwriting. The mixing and the Bad Seeds artistry is magnificent. I got the honor of writing a review on it, thanks to Andrew, who kept me from writing a dissertation on it and helped bring me back down to earth to where I could just review the album. But it's just that good, and I have enjoyed it immensely. So those are my recommendations for right now, and eager to hear what Scott has to say.
Thanks, Rick. First and foremost, I've been hearing great things about that Michelle Ndegeocello record. She's been on my radar since the 90s, so I need to check that out. I don't have a ton of new stuff that I've been listening to, but I gotta echo Rick's sentiment about Wild God from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, or as I like to call them, the Dark E Street Band. Although they haven't really been as dark of late, and their last couple of records I couldn't really connect with, and maybe I need to revisit them, try a little harder, maybe sit down one-on-one with Rick, who can go, no, you got to listen to it this way. But I really dig Wild God in a way that I can't quite describe. I've heard reviews of this saying it's joyful, and it's definitely low-key joyful. It's not like jump up and down joyful, but you can definitely feel there is just this positivity in there. Just, I haven't really even begun to scratch the surface of the lyrics, but I've spun it at least about 3 times, and already it's a contender for year-end top 10 status. The other one that I've been digging the crap out of, and I never thought I'd be able to say that in 2024 we've got a brand new record from the I've been a huge fan of these, or I can't even say these guys. The is technically just Matt Johnson, a British singer, songwriter, force of nature. His voice sounds as perfect as it's always sounded, because he's always sang in this deep, rich register that when you sing that way, you have a low risk of damaging it as you get older. His voice sounds as great as it ever did. His lyrical perspective is as sharp as ever. It's razor sharp. These songs just, it's like he never went away. And on top of that, he had a near-death experience a couple of years ago and was in the hospital, and that informs some of these songs. And of course, there's songs here about swipe culture dating. There's a song here called Kiss the Ring of POTUS. Just, if you want songs that really cut to the heart of the world around us, Ensoulment by the it doesn't get much better than that. Other than that, since I've been between jobs for a little over a year, I only get to rock shows when friends just extend the hand of kindness. I was lucky enough to see my third Jason Isbell show, which was also my third Alejandro Escovedo show, and that was great. But the show that I was really looking forward to was stand-up comedian and one of the finest human beings on earth, Mr. Joe Pera. And if you're not already aware of Joe Pera's TV show, he had a show called Joe Pera Talks with You. And it's a show that I cherish so much that I gatekeep it. But I'm giving it away free tonight. It's on Max. If you need something that makes you feel like life is worth living, watch Joe Pera Talks with You. All 3 seasons are on Max. It used to be on Adult Swim, and the episodes are fairly short. I would recommend watching the very first episode, skip ahead to episode 6 of season 1, the one called Joe Pera Reads the Church Announcements, and then thank me later. Other than that, I'm still knee-deep in my rewatch of Homicide: Life on the Street. It is still the only cop show that matters and still my all-time favorite TV show. And that's all I got. Back to you, Andy.
I'm going to bring the whole team up on screen for just a last kind of go round of the Hollywood squares. And I'll start because there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Gus Creeder's dad, Mark, is a fan of the podcast. I think he's listened to it a few times to see his son shine. And Scott, is like you, the most devout Bruce Springsteen fan that I know. Like Gus's dad and you are tied in your devotion to Springsteen.
It's pretty intense.
And
he has a shrine.
And yesterday, Bruce closed a festival in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And the set list is just unbelievable. I just looked it up. It's just
I haven't even had a chance to look at it yet.
It is. Well, after you get off of this, go look up the set list from See Here Now. I mean, just really something else. And speaking of this,
the night before, he just sat in at the Stone Pony with Noah Kahan and like anybody else who showed up, and they just played a bunch of soul covers.
Noah Kahan and Bruce Springsteen did like a pop up.
Yeah, and then Bruce also sat in with Trey Anastasio, and I think he might have sat in with the Gaslight Anthem.
So talk about like fandoms converging when you get like Bruce with Trey. I mean, just like that's just like okay. So speaking of that, the Grateful Dead invited Sturgill Simpson to their Beachfront festival a couple years ago, and Sturgill became a Deadhead. And he's even said that, like, on record. Sturgill has played 2 shows of his tour so far. Close to 35 songs, 3 hours, no encore, no set break, just nonstop.
Wow.
And he's just dumping cover songs. He's covered the Doors, LA Woman. He's covered Prince's Purple Rain. I mean, he's dropping, like, maybe 8 covers into this, like, marathon set. And he looks to be, like, completely happy. Like he looks so happy to be just in a room with other people listening to music. So I'm really kind of freaking out right now about Sturgill Simpson. So
yeah, rightfully so.
Absolutely.
I hope I get to go to one of the concerts.
Same here.
Yeah.
Somebody's talking in somebody's background.
Yeah, it's probably me. Roommates.
Why are you
Do they want to come? Do they want to come on camera, Gus, and make their?
I think they'll be okay. I think one of them's eating cookout, and then the other one's about to make soup.
Okay, it's dinner time at the college pad. All right, last call for stuff you forgot to say on your most recent turn of either on Tracy Chapman or on your current listens. Rick, are you able to drop our topic for next month?
Yes, I am. I think I'm going to bring us for the first time into the 21st century. So I have chosen Death Cab for Cutie's Transatlanticism for our next discussion. So
Cool.
We'll go off camera and we'll pick the date. And thank you all so much for listening. The Music Nerds Record Club is a monthly live stream / podcast. It's just a bunch of friends talking on the internet and letting you guys peer into our little worlds. And we're grateful. It looks like we had a lot of likes and listeners tonight. And the YouTube link will live forever in Cyberland. Thanks for coming along. Let's get back here next month in October for Death Cab for Cutie. Rick will be our lead speaker next month. And hopefully Joe and Amy will be back to join us at that time. And then we have November. Amy picks the record, and then we take a month off of the new listens and the album focus for our best of 2024. It's almost here. Can't wait. Everybody out there, have a great night. Thanks for listening.